So we're gonna smooth out our slabs and we're gonna cut them down to size so that we can form the wall of our mug. This piece that I sent home with you guys, the primary purpose for this slab is to construct the wall of your mugs, and we're gonna wrap that around the form that you guys found yesterday, okay? We're also gonna do a little cleanup work to the edges, because remember, once we use our fettling knife to cut through the clay, that leaves behind some sharp edges, which doesn't really maybe makes sense in terms of working with soft plastic clay, because you're like, oh, well, it's soft, it's, you know, it's flexible, it's not really sharp, okay? But think about how hard that clay gets when it's fired. So we don't want to leave any sharp edges behind after we cut through the clay, especially the part that we put our mouths on our mugs to drink from, okay? So I just have this mug as an example. If you kind of look closely at this rim, you'll see that it's a little bit more rounded, okay? So when we cut through our slab, we're gonna get more of a squared off sharp edge, and we're gonna take some time to just go in and round that out and clean that up so that when we turn it upright and build the wall of our mug, then that top part is already nice and clean and rounded. And just a little bit about your own anatomy when drinking from a cup or a mug like this, you'll probably notice like your glasses in your kitchen or any mugs that you have. When you go to put your mouth on it, that nice thinner rounded lip allows the sides of your mouths, these corners here, to remain closed, okay? So as you're drinking, you kind of form a seal on either side of your mouth so that the liquid just goes into your mouth and doesn't dribble down the side of your face and onto your clothes, right? If we were to leave the edge of that clay really thick, so the full thickness of the slab that we have, without thinning it out, without rounding it out, what you're gonna have happen is this is gonna be a lot wider, and when you go to put your mouth on it, instead of the side of my mouth being nice and closed like this, okay, it's gonna be more open, and I'm gonna have that opening where all that coffee or tea or hot chocolate or whatever is gonna dribble out, okay? So just keep that in mind as we're getting started on this. All right, I'm gonna switch my camera over so you guys can see what I'm working on. Okay, so I've got my slab here, and you might notice when you first open up your plastic to reveal your slab that you've got a canvas texture on the surface. And this is just from running that clay through the slab roller. Okay, so it feels a little bumpy, a little rough. We're gonna smooth that out so that it's easier to incorporate our designs. But most importantly, in smoothing it out, what we're doing is we're strengthening the clay. So all these little clay particles, when they got stretched out, they sort of got pulled apart from one another. But when we go to smooth that back together, we're actually tucking them back up tightly right next to one another. Okay, so those clay particles are getting compressed and sort of pushed together like little puzzle pieces. Okay, so I'm gonna hold my smooth metal rib like this, thumb on one side, 4 fingers on the other side. I'm not gonna use the sharp edge of it to scrape along the clay. I don't wanna scrape and remove the clay. I wanna push down so that slab or that rib is flat against the clay, and I'm just gonna pull against, adding a little bit of pressure. And I'm gonna go over the whole thing. And you'll see that canvas texture begin to smooth out, begin to disappear. And when you run your finger over it again, it'll feel much smoother. It'll almost feel like a smooth piece of plastic. Okay, so note, I'm kind of starting at the edge off the clay and then pushing down and pulling across it. And that way, I'm not leaving like little marks in the clay when I put this sharp edge down. I don't know if you guys can see those little lines that resulted from just starting here and pulling, okay? But I want to start at the very edge and pull all the way across so that I don't get those marks, okay? I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. So when you lift your clay off the plastic bag, and you could even just move it off the plastic entirely and put it directly on your larger board, okay? But just be gentle, okay? You don't want to pinch into the clay and make any thin, weak spots in the slab. So you can see on this side, I've got a few rougher spots that I'm going to work out by smoothing with my rib. Okay, and once that is entirely smooth, I'm now gonna begin to trim this down. So I'm gonna start, I have this elongated piece of clay, okay, and I'm gonna cut a rectangle out of it. But I'm gonna start by just cutting a straight edge across the top. And this is where your ruler comes in handy if you have one. If you don't have a ruler, you can use the edge of your sketchbook to use as like a straight edge to cut up against, okay? Now, I'm not going to drop all the way down to this corner here. I'm just going to cut somewhere right here where it gives me about 2 inches at the top, but I want to leave a good chunk of this, something that I can easily fit the height of my can onto, okay? So I'm gonna leave enough space for the height of my can. So I'm just gonna lay my ruler down. It doesn't go quite to the edge, so I'll move my ruler over when I get to the end of it here. And I'm gonna take my fettling knife and just kind of push it up against my ruler and cut straight across. Okay, like I said, I'm gonna move my ruler slightly, just kind of line it up with that previous cut and finish cutting all the way across. Okay, so I've got my top edge now. I'm gonna take my can, or you could even use your ruler if you find this easier to measure your can's height, okay? And then just use that measurement, or you can use the can itself. It's up to you, okay? So I'm gonna use the can, and I'm just gonna line it up with that cut that I just made at the top, okay? Make sure that top part lines up. And then I'm gonna take my fettling knife and make a little mark down here where the can ends at the bottom, okay? So there's my mark on one side, and then I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. Okay. So I have my height of my can here and my height of my can here, and then I'll take my straight edge again. Just want to first make sure that that lines up from mark to mark. Okay. And then I can move the ruler over from side to side to cut off the remaining, just as long as I have that lined up. Okay, same thing here. Just line it up, make that last little cut. Set that aside because I might need it later for something. Okay, now this slab is going to be much longer than what I actually need for wrapping around my can. I don't quite know how much that is yet. I mean, you can certainly take a pencil and maybe make a little mark, or just know that you're using like a little a point on the label here. And you could certainly start it there at one point and then kind of roll it around to get a gauge of how much you're going to need. So about to right there, but I want to leave a little bit of extra. So you can certainly cut off what you know you won't need, but I would leave extra just in case, because you certainly don't want to cut it too short. Otherwise, we're going to have issues when we get to that point of actually wrapping it around. Okay. All right. So again, knowing this is my top edge, okay, and I know that this part here I'm not going to end up using either, so I'll just cut that little part away. This is the top edge here of my mug. Hold on just a second. Let me move this onto my board so it's not sticking to my plastic. Okay, so this is the top edge of my mug, and like I was saying earlier, I want to take some time to care for that. So right now it's got sharp edges, corners here, and then on the other side, right here when I lift it up. So before I actually form it around my can, I want to take my sponge, just a little bit of water in it. I've squeezed it out so I don't have it running all over the place. And I'm just going to take that across that top corner a couple times. I'm just adding slight pressure so that I can get that nice and rounded out. Okay, so round it out on one side and then flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. You might need to get a little more water. And then I like to go across it with my finger so I can feel a little bit better how rounded it is. Okay, so that gets that initial roundedness in that top part of my mug. And if you take your fingers across it, you can feel how much thinner it is just after rounding it out. Okay, again, not a lot of pressure. I'm not pushing as hard as I can onto the surface of the clay. I'm just adding enough pressure to round out those corners. And then I can take care of it further after I've actually built the mug up, the wall of it. So I'm just going to set this slab aside for now. And I'm going to take my newsprint. So I just ended up cutting, or actually I just folded it and tore it so that I knew it would at least cover the height of my can, and then maybe have a little bit of extra so that you can easily pull that paper out when you need to. Okay, so it doesn't match right against the height of the mug once you make it. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this newsprint around my can, and this is just going to create a protective layer so that when I wrap my clay around the can, I don't have it sticking to the can, it's sticking to the paper, which I can easily peel out later. Little piece of tape is really all you need to hold it. Okay. All right, so once I've gotten to that point, then I am going to take my slab and I'm going to stand it upright and I'm going to wrap it around my can, my form here. Okay, let me turn this so that you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm just going to bend that slab around the can, make sure that it's nice and pressed up against that paper there. Okay, make sure it's nice and tight as you continue to wrap that part of it. And you'll see I have a lot of overlap here, which is just fine. I'm going to trim a lot of that away. But before I do that, I'm going to overlap just a section of it. And then I'm going to cut through both of these ends of my slab together, but I'm going to cut at an angle. Okay, and what this allows me to do, so instead of taking my fettling knife and cutting straight down, okay, so that the blade is perpendicular to my can here, which I know the angle is kind of hard for you guys to see. Let's see. So instead of taking my knife and going straight through like this, I want to cut it at a slight angle. Okay, and that creates, instead of two ends that meet perfectly like this, it creates a slight bevel or an angle so that the ends of my clay can overlap slightly without adding any thickness to it. Okay, so that both slab ends are the same thickness, but at an angle, they can meet up nicely and not add like a big bump in the side of my mug. Okay. So I think it'll be easier to see once I actually cut it. Okay. So I'm going to take my blade and I'm going to just turn it at an angle. And I'm going to cut straight down, but keeping that angle there. Okay. Do you guys see that now, how right here, this cut is at an angle as opposed to going straight in from the outside? Does that make sense, what I just did? So then when I take the extra piece of clay away, and you see how I have more of an angle here, a bevel, and then same thing with this piece on the inside. Okay, so that angle is going the other way, so that when I bring, actually, well, you know what? I need to actually slightly cut that again because it overlapped a little too much. Okay, so I'm gonna just do that again. I'm gonna follow that same angle. Cut that last little remaining piece out. Okay, and then I've got something that fits together a little bit better right there. Okay, got a little space in between the can and the clay, but that's okay because as it dries, it'll shrink in and then it'll be a perfect fit. Okay, okay, so let me open that up and you guys can see a little bit better. Okay, so I've got this angle right in here, and then I've got an angle right here that I'm then going to score and slip and attach those two pieces together. Okay, so you can either score and add slip that you may have already at your disposal, or you could just add some water and make that slip on the surface. Okay, so while I'm scoring and slipping, does anyone have any questions that I can answer?
Is there anything I can use as a replacement for a rib tool? Because I can't find it right now.
Patrick, I'm sorry, you're kind of breaking up. A replacement for what now?
A rib tool?
A ruler?
Rib tool.
Rib tool, yes. Yeah, if you have like an old gift card, even, you know, like a debit card or credit card, I wouldn't use like a current one, but something like that would be fine. What else? What else? Let me think about that. I have successfully used like gift cards in the past. If you have something like that or similar to that, or sometimes you get like those internet, you know, Spectrum might send you a card that I don't know why they send you those cards, but they're like little plastic cards they send you in the mail. That would be a good substitute. Okay, so then I'm just going to bring those two edges together. And that little bit of that angle that kind of overhangs, I can really just use that to press up against the side of my clay. And that kind of helps to lock everything in place. So I'll use my finger first to get a good connection. And then I would say use your rib tool to secure that connection and smooth over that seam. Okay. All right. So, and then once I take this can out, the seam that's on the inside from that connection, I can get in there and smooth that together with my modeling stick, the rounded end, just kind of pull that together. But I want to give this a chance to set up a little bit before I actually start worrying about that.